you on the call are familiar with, is short for the Resilience Initiative for Southeastern and Eastern Ohio. It is a U.S. EDA Assistance to Coal Communities program, and it's led by Ohio University, Buckeye Hills Regional Council, and Omega. So most of you on the call probably fall into either Omega or Buckeye Hills jurisdiction. But the program is designed to provide technical assistance to communities impacted by coal-fired power plants and really focused on opportunity zone planning, economic diversification, development education, and investment attraction. My name is Katie Ward. I'm a project manager with Steadfast City. So Steadfast City is an economic and community development consulting firm, really focused on developing better through a holistic approach that's geared towards trying to converge the public, private, and philanthropic sectors. Some other familiar faces on the slide, my colleague Joe Glasscock out of St. Louis, as well as Allison Gray Gunston. Some of you may have met Allison or Joel during the initial research phase of this RISE technical assistance, and probably had spoken to one of them about what types of development you'd like to see in your areas, what resources you would need to make those happen for your community. Also want to mention our president and CEO, Doug. Doug started Steadfast about 3 years ago with the goal in mind to catalyze businesses, neighborhoods, organizations, and communities. He's got 20 plus years of experience in economic development. And the Steadfast team has really grown from kind of our main office in St. Louis to New York, to Ohio, and most recently into Alabama, actually. So we're definitely kind of spreading out and targeting those different types of communities. Steadfast has also partnered with Ray Daffner. He's principal at Strategic Advisory and Investment Services on this technical assistance coordination. We were linked up with Ray through Opportunity Appalachia. I'm sure a lot of you have either worked with or met Ray through Opportunity Appalachia. He's really a key member of their team and has been a great resource in helping us coordinate these sessions. We're also privileged to have our two guest presenters today. We have John from Novogradac joining us today, as well as Al from Capzone Impact Investments. Say that 3 times fast. I'll make sure that we give our guest speakers a more proper introduction a little bit later on, but right now I just like to lay out kind of some general information on the series before jumping into their presentations. So quickly, just want to plug our other upcoming seminars. There's only 2 left, so make sure you get the word out and kind of raise awareness for these remaining seminars. Currently, and they have been scheduled for the 3rd Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. Eastern. There is a seminar schedule that includes the upcoming session links within a resource bank, and I'll describe that here in a few slides. But when looking at these upcoming seminars and even reviewing the past seminar recordings, try to think about who from your office or organization could benefit from attending, or if there's someone from outside your agency that you think you should invite. We're not restricting access to anyone. We're not restricting access to the live sessions nor the recorded sessions. So you can definitely go back in time and share those past recordings as well. So today's seminar, again, is going to focus on businesses located in or considering relocating to a qualified opportunity zone and what makes a business eligible for the OZ incentive. We're going to have John share his knowledge with us as it relates to qualified OZ businesses, what's qualified, what's not qualified, and kind of the methods for determining eligibility. Then Al will share some of his experience at Capzone and provide us with some insight into the real-world application of OZ incentives with businesses. If you have any questions as we go along, we encourage you to send that to us through the Zoom chat feature. We'll be monitoring that today throughout today's session. You can send it directly to me. You can send it directly to our host, and Jill will read it. But we will be monitoring that. So if a question pops up as we go along, just go ahead and send it to us and we'll touch on it. We do plan on having a Q&A session after our presentations today. So hopefully we'll address any and all of those questions at that time. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to share the resources that are being made available as part of this webinar series. If you scan that QR code on your screen with your phone, it will take you to an interactive FAQ forum where you can submit any related questions, and someone from our team will either answer it or find somebody that can answer it, and get that response back to you as quickly as possible. All of the submitted questions through that FAQ system will be added to an overall FAQ page, and that will be in the resource folder, which can be accessed through that link on your slide. So that link will take you to a page where you can find the most up-to-date resources pertaining to the webinar series. And that includes that seminar schedule with all of the recording links and all of the upcoming webinar links, as well as a glossary, which I think is a very underrated tool, but knowing those terms before you really jump into these projects is going to be super helpful. There's also a listing of resources with live links to kind of help you navigate the world of OZs and development, which again, trying to wrap your head around where to start, where to go, diving into more specific topics, that's going to be really helpful for you. And then there's also a subfolder for all of the workshops, which is where you're going to find all of the recordings from the past presentations. So with that, I'd like to kick it over to John to share his screen. And I'll do a brief little intro for John while he gets that queued up. So John, as we mentioned, is a partner at Novogradac, and he actually works out of their office in Dover, Ohio. He specializes in real estate finance, community development, and renewable energy industries. John has extensive financial experience working with businesses, including more than 25 years in public accounting and 4 years as an executive financial manager. At Novogradac, he specializes in the Opportunity Zone incentive, as well as the historic rehab tax credit, or the HTC, new market tax credit, and renewable energy tax credits. He also leads and coordinates the Novogradac Opportunity Zones Working Group, which is a membership organization that's really highly regarded for the work that it's done in addressing those technical issues surrounding the OZ incentive. So definitely a great resource for us to have today, and we're honored to have John here. So John?
Great, thank you so much, Katie. How is my screen looking?
Good. If you could kick it over to the slideshow view so we can see the full screen.
Okay, now here. Slideshow view.
Yeah, that top tab. Up, 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 up. Next to animations. There, right there.
Okay.
Click the slideshow, and then if you go over to the right, all the way to the left, I'm sorry, from the beginning, there's a little square with, yep, over from the beginning under file.
Oh. Does that work?
I might be trying to load.
Are you seeing my screen?
We are seeing your just overall PowerPoint window. We're not seeing the full screen.
Oh, because it's shown as a full screen on mine. Sorry about this.
Recording.
If you have it pulled up on full screen in another window, if you just go back to share screen and then select that wherever window it's open in the full screen view, that might work.
Instead of the file, you mean?
Instead of the PowerPoint window, if you just click on. Are you on multiple monitors?
Yeah, I'm on double monitor.
Yeah, so you might have to click the one that's already pulled up on the other on your other screen.
Oh.
that's not working for you, you can just share it how you did before, and then we can
Yeah, I
just.
think that's what I'm gonna end up doing because we're running out of time. Is that better or the same?
We're still just seeing the window, but I think we can just roll with it.
Okay, that's just.
I think we can view it, yeah.
Okay, because it's showing on my screen as only the PowerPoint, but I'm not, I'm an opportunity zone expert, not a PowerPoint.
Not a PowerPoint expert.
Yeah.
That's fine. We all have
Yeah.
our strengths.
Right. Okay, so there was I wasn't part of the Opportunity Zone 101. So a lot of the basics I'm sure you reviewed. There may be some overlap. The rules are similar for operating businesses and real estate. Real estate tends to be the easier choice from a regulatory perspective. And as shown, just a little background on funding, we actually do track funding and opportunity zones across the country. And we have, I'd say a subset of the marketplace. And we track 1,400 funds, I think it is up to now, of which 1,100 of them have provided fundraising activity and asset class and the like. And the majority of it is real estate. The majority of the real estate's residential real estate. Operating businesses sort of make up 5% of that funding. The funding that we track is at $30 billion. We think it's about 3 to 4 times that amount. So we think $100 billion has been invested in opportunity zones since its inception. But operating businesses, we're not our survey. We don't think we capture a lot of the operating business investment because it's not as readily available and tends to be more captive, not public, as well as operating businesses tend to need smaller chunks of cash more frequently, where real estate, you typically see big chunks of cash invested on the front end of a transaction. And so, that's some of it, I think, why operating businesses have lagged, but it is more difficult. And I'll try to cover within the rules, how you would qualify from an operating business perspective. But just to start up front with the structural elements, which I think you probably covered in 101, but typically it's a 3-tier structure: investor, qualified opportunity fund, and then qualified opportunity zone business. You can actually operate a business or invest in, real estate assets in an opportunity zone directly out of the quaff. Very few deals are done that way because it's not as flexible. It doesn't give you as much time to invest to use your money. The rules are a little different. The key takeaway here is that in this structure, which is typically what we see, where a qualified opportunity fund invests into a qualified opportunity zone business, which both tend to be partnership structures, is that the original issue, you have to purchase original issue interest in that business. So if you were to sort of come upon a qualified opportunity zone business that someone else might own and you buy their interest in the zone with your qualified opportunity fund dollars, that's not a qualified investment. It has to be original issue. So it's an important point that you would have to invest money into the business, and receive an interest, in this case, a partnership interest for that investment, not buy it off a current partner. So that's a key takeaway. And I'm going to move pretty quick because we only have 20 minutes and there's a lot of information. But I think there's a Q&A later, so we'll hopefully capture some questions there. The requirements to be a qualified opportunity zone business. First and foremost, 70% of your tangible property has to be used in an opportunity zone. And that's a key, that's the key requirement of a business. That's kind of why real estate tends to be easier because it's not moving. And when you get an opportunity zone business, you know, you have tangible assets that might be used in different parts of the city or different parts of the country. You know, it's interesting, like I've had questions from folks who wanted to invest in an airport that own the planes, that own, you know, and so it's like, well, where are those planes being used, right? They're being used, you know, as they fly through the country in various opportunity zones. It'd be a nightmare to try to figure out if 70% of their use was actually, or maybe they're not even in the opportunity zone once you're in the sky, right? And so that's a crazy example, but it's you know, it kind of reveals the complexity of businesses that are using assets, you know, in different locales. So the tangible property rule is the big rule. Secondly, at least 50% of the income derived from the business needs to be derived in an opportunity zone. And there's some safe harbors for that. We'll go over that. But really, it's like, where you know, where's your activity? Where are you earning your money as a business? Because businesses, especially today, you know, you can have lots of intangibles, active intangible assets, or be completely on a web, or you know, be located maybe in a zone as for an office, but you know, maybe your business doesn't, or maybe your business consists of doing services in other parts of the state, you know. And so the question is, you know, where am I doing business? And there's some, like I said, there's some safe harbors we'll go over that help businesses determine where they're actually doing their business. The other requirement is that intangible property that you have needs to be active in the business, in the zone again. So intangible property, you know, that's things like patents, trademarks, and the like. And so they've given us a pretty good rule for that. Pretty much if you have intangible property that you're using to make money in your business, it can be sort of determined to be used in the business. And as long as the business in the zone, it's not a lot of brain damage to figure it out. But if you're just sort of using opportunity zone dollars or gain dollars to, say, buy a patent that you intend to sell at some point, and there's really no activity around the patent, it's often referred to as sort of a patent box. That's why this rule is there. They want to make sure that, you know, there's actually some investment in the opportunity zone and not disguised investment, because you might have an office there and your key asset is this patent that you might not even develop or purchase. So that's something they're trying to avoid there. And then lastly, 5% of your assets cannot be what's considered non-qualified financial property. And that's, you know, the definitions there where it really means any cash, debt, stock, partnership interest, investments. You can't really be an investment company or even a bank, right? Because most of the assets are financial assets that you're just sort of holding, you know, in the balance sheet. They don't really locate it in the zone. In cash itself, you can't put gains into a partnership and not do anything with them and just hold cash. And so there are some safe harbors around the cash that you might be holding for working capital from a business perspective. You know, there are needs, especially when the business is being developed, there's cash needs on the front end. And as long as you have documented the fact that you're going to use that cash, you know, over a 31-month period is sort of the general rule, to either build an asset or, you know, like I said, working capital for the business, then you're okay. But if you don't have a plan, you're just holding cash, that's bad. And so that's why they have this sort of 5% rule, that your assets, 5% of your assets can't be in these, what I'll call financial assets. So that's the general rules. We'll go over them in a little more detail. There's also a requirement where you can't be a sin business. And the sin businesses are listed here, but you know, golf courses, country clubs, massage parlors, hot tub facilities, suntan facility, racetrack, and then really what was the state alcohol store where you buy alcohol for consumption off premises. And so those are sin businesses. That list is old. It's been in the code for a long time, and the different code sections sort of capture or hang on to that. And there are some other businesses that have developed that folks wonder if they're same business or not. For instance, if like a marijuana store, that's not on the list. So there are things out there now that probably weren't there when they came up with this list, but this is the full list of things that businesses that you can't be in and be a qualified business. With respect to the property, what is qualified opportunity zone business property? So this is the 70% test, and 70% of your tangible assets have to be this. And first and foremost, it has to be fairly new to the business. The property had to be purchased after December 31st, 2017. The significance of that date is that's when the law passed. And so they wanted new assets. They wanted new assets in the zone. So as long as you're buying, it could be an older asset, but needs to be new in the zone. And secondly, you have to use this property that you own. I sort of mentioned substantially all of it needs to be used in the zone. So you can hold sort of tangible property that's portable and use it in different places, but it's really 70% of the time it needs to be used in the zone. So that's an important criteria. And again, that's why real estate is an easy investment, because it doesn't move. And so folks get a comfort that it's going to be used where it sits. And then the original use of this property that you purchase, again, it doesn't have to be new property, but the original use in the zone has to commence with the business. So you can buy used property as a business, it just couldn't have been used in the zone before. And so that's sort of the general rule. If in fact property was used in the zone before, like real estate, then it still could be good property if you substantially improve it. And substantial improvement means that you essentially invest more than what you bought it for. So you can picture an older building in a zone, the business buys it, rehabs it, they have to spend as much as they bought it for. And then it makes it good property. If you spend less, then it's not good property. This also, substantial improvement rule, would work with a business moving into the zone, because businesses might have machines and the like that they have used outside the zone, and I'm working on a deal right now where a client is moving 3 businesses into the zone, combining them under one roof, and has lots of old assets. And so these assets aren't going to be good, and they're likely not going to improve the individual assets, because you don't necessarily spend as much as you bought a machine for. You might do that with a building, but you're not going to necessarily do it with a machine. And so there's some rules where you can aggregate assets under a business that are functionally related, and those are good rules in the regs that help you sort of get over this substantial improvement issue with old assets. So there is flexibility that was added to the regulations late in the game that helped operating businesses deal with these sort of old assets. And so just note that. I'm not going to go over how exactly that rule works, because we don't have the time, but do note that. Lease property is also tangible property. And so businesses that don't necessarily own their property and bought it after 2017 and used it first in the zone, and all the things that we just talked about. But lease property counts. And so how do you value lease property for the 70% requirement? You look at the term of the lease and you take a present value of that term using an applicable federal tax or interest rate that's in the code. And then that gives you your value. It's a present value. And then you use that value throughout the whole time that you own the property. And so that's how we value leased assets. For leased assets to be good, it has to be a market rate lease, arm's length. Unless it's a local government lease. A lot of times you have local governments that'll lease property for $1, or Indian tribal governments who often do the same thing. And so there is a carve out for that. But for the most part, it needs to be a market rate lease, and non-related parties leasing to one another. are sort of deemed to be market rate. You don't have to sort of prove that it's market rate because it's arm's length, and the presumption is that it is market rate. But property that is a related party lease, that's a different story where it's that presumption isn't there, and so you would have to sort of have support that it's arm's length. The lease itself, again, would have to be entered into in that same date, December 2017. And again, the property that you're leasing has to be used in the zone. That same rule where they want to make sure that the business is actually using the property in the zone. So that's sort of the tangible property owned and leased. And again, that's a 70% requirement, which is good. It gives you sort of some leeway if you have bad assets or assets outside of the zone. It may not trip you up where you're not qualified. You have this sort of 30% carve out. So that's opportunity zone business property. The active conduct test, which is where you sort of have to have your income earned in the zone. Safe harbors that I was talking about are here. And the way you measure this sort of test is that 50% of your gross income is earned in the zone. You can look at your employee wages and where the employees are performing their services. So 50% of the services of the business are performed in the zone, which can be measured by either looking at the hours that your employees worked over total hours that your business employees work, or looking at the payroll that the employees receive versus total payroll. So payroll of employees that are working in the zone versus total payroll in the company. If more than 50% of that is in the zone, then it's qualified. So that's sort of a safe harbor that Treasury has given us to determine whether where your gross income is earned, because it's difficult to sort of understand, especially when you're if you're a web-based business that's selling things all over the country, right? You don't really know where it's difficult to determine or to define where your dollars or revenue are being earned, and so they gave us this payroll example. They also sort of give us this sort of really flexible example or safe harbor that says you can also sort of be considered to be doing 50% of your business in the zone if the tangible property of the business that is in the zone and the management functions of the business that are being performed are performed in the zone. And they give us an example in the reg. It's a landscaping business, because landscaping businesses, they have tangible property in the zone, and then they, in the morning they take that tangible property and go out to their different customers, and at night they come back and bring the tangible property in. But management has, their offices are in the zone. Most of the decisions are being made from that central location, and so that still would be a qualified business, even though tangible property might be used outside of the zone. And so that's something to, help those businesses that, don't necessarily fall into the payroll category. It also is a little murky because there's not a lot of guidance around it. And so if you can get into one of the two services performed tests with payroll or hours, in my experience, it makes investors a little more comfortable to fit into those first two tests. And then there's this sort of catch-all that says facts and circumstances that we didn't think about, you can get you there as well, right? And so there's no guidance around that, but if you can have the right facts and circumstances to sort of prove that, hey, we're really earning our revenue in its own. Actually, real estate doesn't fall into these categories, right? Because real estate doesn't necessarily have management in the zone. It doesn't have payroll in the zone a lot of times, maybe no payroll. But clearly, if I had a building that was renting it, or if I was renting property in the zone, then that would be more like the facts and circumstances of being in the zone. But just note that 50% of the revenue of the business needs to be earned in the zone. And when you're dealing with businesses that have multiple locations, it gets complicated, to be able to qualify as a qualified opportunity zone business. And then the non-qualified property test, which we sort of already talked about, but this is just a little more detail on how it would be determined. This trips a lot of folks up because 5% is not a big number, and especially if you're not asset heavy. So you really can't carry a lot of cash in your balance sheet unless you fall into the safe harbor, which we'll talk about next. But the business itself. This is a safe harbor. So when you look at non-qualified financial property in the definition, it excludes reasonable working capital. The problem is reasonable working capital is not a really good definition around it. So they gave us a safe harbor for that. But, you know, as a business, you can make a good case that you need X dollars in your balance sheet in order to, you know, cover your future expenditures of developing that business. And so that's something that's not necessarily a clear cut safe harbor, but, you know, I think that folks that operate in this space feel that they're not in the safe harbor that we're going to talk about next, that they're not qualified. But, you know, if you have a case for cash in your balance sheet that has a reasonable use in the future, then, you know, I think you can meet this test. And so, but what they did give us is this safe harbor for reasonable working capital, and it's very complicated, but it does provide safety for businesses to determine, you know, whether they're qualified, even though they might have these sort of liquid assets in their balance sheet. It also, with the working capital safe harbor, does they sort of piggyback on top of it to help folks feel comfortable that a startup business can be qualified, even though it's not active yet. Because the rule is that the business, like I said, has to be active in the zone, needs to be earning its money in the zone in the different tests that we talked about, you know, with respect to whether it is or isn't. But when a business is developing, you know, they aren't necessarily active right away, especially real estate, right? If you're building a building in the zone, you're not going to be active until it's placed in service. And so they provided this sort of working capital safe harbor that essentially says, if I have cash in my balance sheet and I have documented the use of that cash, and I have this sort of reasonable schedule that's consistent with the reasonable startup of a business, and it's, you know, no longer than 31 months to use this cash, then I'm in a safe harbor, not only for the non-qualified financial property, that 5% rule, but I also don't have to be sort of active during that period. And I also don't have to do the asset test during that period. So I sort of have this safe harbor period for 31 months where I can get this business started and running to the point where it meets all the qualifications based on tangible property and revenue. And so that's a nice feature of the regs. It's also very complicated, probably where I spend most of my time helping people understand what it means, how to document it, and you know, making sure that they're within this working capital safe harbor. But that's sort of the rules. I know I went through them very quickly. Some of the problems that folks have with, I guess, the 1 minute I have left here with operating businesses is, I think the main problem is, where you don't see it, is, you know, the opportunity zones is an incentive that I'll call a shallow incentive. You might get 300 to 500 basis points on what you would, on an after-tax basis, what you would earn from investing in a business otherwise. Because when you calculate, you know, the benefits of not having gain on the back end, of course, assuming that it is an appreciating asset, and the benefits of deferral, and, you know, some of the little benefits that are gone now, but were there along the way, where you got 5 or 10% forgiveness on the initial gain. The business still has to be a viable business that you expect to appreciate. Otherwise, that big benefit on the back end is not a benefit, right? If I'm not appreciating, the business isn't appreciating when I sell it someday, there's no gain to exclude. And so real estate tends to be a little more secure, you know, that you know you're going to get that benefit, because, you know, traditionally real estate is always over a 10-year period has risen in value. And so I think that's why you see a lot more real estate. And what we see a lot in business funding is businesses funding real estate that they eventually lease to the operating businesses. And so it's a separate entity that holds the real estate and, excuse me, and it's easier to fit into the rules. But something that's necessary for the operating business to operate. But we've done a lot of operating businesses by themselves. That fit into these rules, a number of clients, but they tend to be asset heavy so that you can, so that you can determine whether they meet the opportunity zone business property test. So I'll stop there because I'm at my 20 minutes and let Al fill in color about how this really works.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
That was a great breakdown of the requirements and the eligibility test. You really made those complex regulations easily digestible. So I know we all appreciate that. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat popping up right now. So again, just anybody in the audience, go ahead and send that to us. And if we have time at the end, we'll address them then. But if we can turn it over to Al, John, you'll have to stop sharing your screen so Al can share his and he can get his slides up. But while he's doing that, like I mentioned earlier, Al is the CEO of CapZone, which is an investment management company that connects profits to purpose by bringing together financial, intellectual, and human capital to benefit low-income communities. CapZone applies investment strategies that create wealth, assets, and opportunity, specifically in distressed areas, over a range of sectors, such as market rate affordable housing, sustainable energy projects, water and power infrastructure, and even agricultural projects. Throughout Al's 35-year finance career, he's been an advocate and a practitioner for positive social impact investing at a scale. At CapZone, he combines his expertise and experience to develop a new asset class, opportunity zones, to connect profits to purpose nationally. So Al, if
I somehow lost the PowerPoint here. We're having
it is not our day for PowerPoint.
It is. I'm not sure where. I apologize on it. I think John did such a great idea on the slides. I'm just happy if it makes sense just to talk through a couple of issues, and I will forward them the slides. But I only had a few slides, and frankly, they're redundant of John. So would it be just helpful if I had a little bit of a discussion going on, Katie?
Absolutely, go for it.
Great. Well, hi everybody, and I want to thank Katie and her colleagues for having me. It's really great, and it's always hard to follow John. John is the expert in the country on opportunity zones. So if you have either a real estate or operating company, definitely talk to John and Novogradic. So the last thing I'll say is I'm from Ohio, and I grew up in Heath, Ohio. I was a Bulldog, played football, and my dad taught at Muskingum College. My mom worked at Denison University. I went summers to Buckeye Lake. So I'm very proud to bring this home. I run around the country to Tulsa and Chicago and Mississippi and everywhere talking about zones. So this is for me a very special treat. So thank you, Katie, for having me. So what I want to say is that what John outlined is really, really complicated. And you have to understand why. The law was passed as a 15-page law in the tax cut bill in December 17. And it just said, if you have a capital gain that goes to cash and you do everything right, you don't pay tax certain ways on the old gain and new gain, but it's got to go in the zone. And the IRS got that 15-page law and created 544 pages of regulations. And what happened early on in 2018 and 19 is the IRS focused on real estate because you could see the real estate, the people were there working on constructing the real estate, then later managing the real estate. So to John's point, real estate was, everyone thought it's a real estate law. This is kind of a 1031 on steroids or LIHTC. And it's not. It just said equity investment. So what CapZone did, we were, I think, the first fund in the country in March 18, before the regs came out. I had worked on Wall Street for 35 years, doing mergers, acquisitions, corporate finance, derivatives, structured finance, billion-dollar hostile takeovers. And I saw this law and I said, this is not how America normally gives a tax subsidy. You know, we subsidize by sector, right? You know, a solar credit or a light tech housing credit, or by demographics, right? For a veteran, a student, someone who's homeless. We don't do it by location, by and large. You know, there's some exceptions, TIFs and what have you. So when this law came out, people said, how do I know I'm in the zone to get this tax break? And it could be pretty major. It's you don't pay tax after 10 years on the gain. So if you hit the next Google or Airbnb at 1,000 times your money, that's untaxed. And in Ohio, actually, there's a conforming law that helps at the state level too. So the real estate sector has attracted most of the capital, including from us. We've invested many tens of millions of dollars in real estate around the country, in Colorado and Connecticut, other places. But operating companies is the heart of the law, of the intent. It was meant to create jobs. It was meant to create economic activity. I tell people, why do people invest in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, close to where I live in Connecticut? Because other people have invested over the years in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, right? There are these catalytic events that create an anchor. It could be a university, a military base, you know, an Intel fab. That then around that, there's a lot of other economic activity that can be supported and garnered. So what we do is we support economic activity, especially on the operating business, with something we call capstone analytics. So when the law was passed, we created Capstone Impact Investments as a QOF. We ourselves are a QOF. We've taken in gains money from our investors in Connecticut, but we operate nationally, where we would take gains from our investors, write a check into a deal, real estate or non-real estate, and then help other people create their own funds to also invest in our deals. A little complicated, but I think it's a great way to unleash a lot of capital. And we've done that now in most of our deals. We're working now in a movie studio in New York State, a data center in Maine. The operating companies, to John's point, are going to be very asset heavy, because people still like that downside protection of having an asset. Could be the real estate, could be the factory, could be the distribution center, but they want that operating company lift. The other thing that's happening is, done properly, you get positive social impact. Some people call that ESG, environmental social governance. Other people call it social impact. But you're getting a tax break to help low income communities, you know, people who have not had their fair share of capital. So we think this is going to be a mega trend. We think the number is a little larger, John. We think it's closer to 180 billion already in funds today. There are about 20,000 funds around the country, because you can set it up yourself. There's no approval, no disclosure, unlimited. It's very easy to set up your own fund. Every individual can do it. Every corporation can do it. Any insurance company can do it. So it's meant to be that easy. But then the hard part is, once the money's in the fund, how do I make sure my investment in a business is compliant? So just to finish the swing here, what Capstone did is, one of our companies in our portfolio is called Capstone Analytics. It itself is a QOZB business. It's headquartered in Dallas in a zone. It has offices now and activities around the country. But what it does, it helps our portfolio companies comply through all the rules John walked you through: the 70-30 rule, the 50-50 rule, the 40% rule, the SIN industries. You know, there are probably hundreds of rules that have to be followed. You miss one, you know, you may not get the tax break, and no one's giving you, you know, a certificate that you've made it. You just hope in 10 years or more, when you say, I don't owe tax, you better be right. So we help our companies do that. And it's also a service offering for any other company. So if you have a business or an investment, Capstone Analytics can be a service provider to you. Think of it almost like a TurboTax. You know, it collects all the information, make sure monthly that you get the reports, and then it creates reports for John and his colleagues in the accounting industry, and for lawyers to make opinions and audits to say, okay, is this compliant? Do I have to remediate? We think that platform is very important for people to put big money into the sector. And the last thing I'll say, and then I know we have then about 10 minutes for Q&A, is there's an extension and improvement law that's pending on Capitol Hill right now. And that law says that there'll be mandated increased compliance and reporting. So right now, by and large, the penalty for not complying is is you don't get the tax break. There will be, I mean, reasonable, but there'll be penalties that if you have your cash that's not paying the tax you owe and you're deferring it, there'll be penalties and compliance mandates. So we believe that it's a good thing to have all your reports, all your data organized, compliant. You can get alerts to fix things. So we want to help everyone do that. So to our extent, growing up in Ohio, a lot of my friends, fathers and mothers worked at the New York Air Force Base. That's all a zone. Every company in that formerly BRAC base, from Boeing to others, can use Opportunity Zone money. And the projects we're working around the country are often very large operating companies, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that will be invested, because once this law gets passed, and we believe it will, this extension bill, it'll make very clear improvements in the law that were frankly needed. There'll be a fund-to-fund structure that will allow institutions to come in, and some of the large family offices, insurance companies, and others, corporations, want to put hundreds of millions of dollars into the program. That means you need to scale, but most importantly, get the buy-in of the community. So I would love to, with Katie's guidance, create good relationships with people in Ohio and help guide a lot of the national money looking to come into Ohio on a compliant basis, and that's welcomed by the communities, right? This is a long-term investment over 10 years. And the large institutions want to make sure they're associated with positive impact. So listening to the community, taking those priorities in. For us at Capstone, and we work a lot with Novogradac, so you could see us as a team. We would love to help anyone set up a fund or receive the money on a compliant basis and help Ohio over the long run. So that's my a few minutes. I know we have 10 minutes for Q&A, Katie.
Thanks, Al. Yeah, we've had a lot of inquiries about setting up a fund and what that compliance would look like. So I definitely think maybe if we post your contact info maybe on our resource page and
Sure.
with your okay
Of
on
course,
that,
of course, yeah.
that'd be awesome. So I think you can see my Q&A screen. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Joel, have you gotten anything directly?
Nothing on mine at the moment.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll give people just a couple more minutes, but again, that QR code on the screen, that takes you to our interactive FAQ forum. And so if you're, kind of thinking through a question, trying to figure out, how to phrase it, you can always submit that later on, and we can send that off to, Al or John and maybe get their input on it. But since I'm not seeing anything in the chat right now,
Katie, could I make one other point, which
Please,
is really important and people should know about it? The federal government wants to support zones. The prior administration had an Opportunity Zone Council at the White House that had all 15 agencies and departments, HUD, EPA, the USDA, and others, all said, my grant programs, my loan programs, and my regulatory relief are tied to helping the zones around the country, and about 10% of America is in a zone. So that has actually survived to this administration. So to the extent you have an operating business, and that's part of our Capstone Analytics database, we have the ability to tie companies to other support at the federal level that then could, support a transportation project or a healthcare project or a distance learning project. So think very broadly that this is not just real estate, and there are also banks want to do this for Community Reinvestment Act reasons. It's really a magnet to bring a lot of resources. So if you have a business, we'd love to be able to help anyone in Ohio access all the other resources available.
It's really helpful. Thank you. Still not seeing anything in the chat, so I will just throw up our contact info. Again, that QR code takes you to our FAQ, and then that link takes you to our resource drive, which has all the past recordings, the resource page, glossary, things like that. But with that, I just want to thank our speakers today for joining us, and for everybody rolling with our technical issues. Everything that can go wrong typically does go wrong on Zoom calls. So just thank you everybody for your patience and grace with that. But this was a very helpful session, a lot of really great information. And I think this gives, these communities kind of a starting off point as far as where to go, where to look, and kind of how to get these things going, and how they can help, businesses in their communities or even they themselves establish a fund. So this was very helpful. So I think everybody gets 7 minutes back to their day, which is always a nice thing. So thank you again, everyone, and join us next month.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.